Free.
Amazing.
Hey, podcast listeners, Rio Wong with you once again with Nonprofit Lowdown. I am super psyched because today my guest is my friend Tania Bhattacharyya, who is the founder of Lumos Marketing, and we are going to talk about LinkedIn as a vehicle channel for your nonprofit organization. And personally, LinkedIn is my main vehicle, so I'm excited for this. Tania, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat. I've been like a longtime fan, and so this is just awesome. Thank you for having me
Oh
on the show.
my gosh. I have been a longtime fan of yours, which is so funny because we have so many friends in common. I was like, why are we not already friends? It's so weird.
I know. And then you were in Japan, my favorite place, and
Oh
you
my
were just doing
God.
all the things I like to do. I was like, we need to be besties.
Besties. I know. Well, and also I've been talking a lot about having a business bestie. So we're in a little crew, you, me, Brooke Ritchie Babbitt, I'm name checking everyone, Jess Campbell, Cindy Wagman, Rachel Beerbauer, and we're like hanging and doing the thing. So yay.
Yeah.
Yay for friends.
Yay for friends. We're learning, we're doing, we're supporting each other, we're acting as, each other's little bubble wrap as we go out and do big things. It's so helpful.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so you are the only member of the crew who's not been on the podcast. So here we are. Before
Here
we
we
jump
are.
into the strategies, because you are just such a genius at brand building and thought leadership on LinkedIn, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get started? And I know you, like all of us, were in the nonprofit world and figuring it out for the first time.
Yeah, figuring it out is a great way of saying it. I was figuring it out on a daily basis. And so, I fell into the nonprofit world kind of by accident. I was still an undergrad student at UC Irvine getting my degree in psychology. It was 2009. The economy was struggling around us. And I was like, let me go find a job. And my first interview happened to be at this incredible organization where, spoiler alert, I ended up staying for 12 years. And it was a women's addiction
Sounds
treatment center.
familiar. Yep.
Yeah, I know. I know that sounds familiar, right? But I didn't know a lot about I was like Bambi. I didn't know much about anything. I was passionate, but I didn't know how to harness that into fundraising. And so when I was there, one of the first things that I did was learn how to help folks tell their story in an ethical way, in a supportive way. I would sit with our alumni and I would work with them to rewrite their recovery narrative. And we'd work together and I'd ask them questions to sort of move from a place where their story was still kind of filled with a lot of trauma and shame and guilt to a story that was really more rooted in their resilience and their courage and their hopes for the future. And I saw how having this new story for themselves really uh, influenced and changed the way they advocated for themselves in their lives, in their jobs, sometimes in the court system, with their families. And that really inspired me. And that really showed me that the story that we have about ourselves is so deeply related to the story that other people see us around, right? See us with. And so I grew in the company. I, eventually became the executive director of our foundation. And I realized like I have a story too. Like I am experiencing this nonprofit. I'm experiencing what it's like to be a young woman, brown leader here in Orange County. And of course, the stories that, I get to experience just being at the facility, it's not up to me to tell our patients' stories, but it is up to me to tell my stories. And so I challenge myself to tell one interesting story on LinkedIn each week. And, it just became a habit. And it was interesting because I did this for a couple weeks and I felt like nothing was happening, right? But I kept at it. I was like, I know that Rome wasn't built in a day or whatever. So I kept going. And before long, I'd say after about 6 weeks and definitely after about a quarter, like for sure after about a quarter, people started reaching out to me to, ask about our fundraising breakfast. I was invited to PR opportunities without pitching. We would get organic referrals from like doctors and interventionists and therapists for our, in terms of patients, just through sharing our stories and top of mind awareness. And so even though we were a pretty small shop, we were about like under a $5 million organization, we grew a really large voice over time because LinkedIn is where the movers and shakers are. It's where we can like access these folks who otherwise are kind of gate kept and inaccessible. And so that I'll stop there. That's a little bit of my story of how I got into
Yeah.
this.
Oh my gosh, I want to unpack so many things that you just said. Okay, so let's just start. Let's back it up because I do think that this notion of storytelling can be triggering for people because I
Yes.
do think a lot of us, especially nonprofits, have been either the recipient of or even the generator of, poverty porn, of stories that
Mm.
kind of play on a lot of the tropes that tell stories that don't put the people that we serve in the best light. So, can you unpack for us, like, how did you move folks from telling the story of like trauma and shame and, pain to stories of hope and resilience and power?
Yeah, that's a concept that I'm especially sensitive to, especially because I worked in the mental health and substance use disorder space, and especially for women and especially for pregnant women, which was the community that we served. The stigma was so deep and entrenched and high, especially back in like 2009 and 2010 when I started working there. And so I was very, very cognizant of like, making sure that this wasn't like a what did you call it? Pain porn or trauma
Yeah,
porn?
poverty porn, like
Poverty porn.
yeah, traumatizing poverty porn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Oh my gosh, yes, I love that. And so really I think it's about rooting our story not so much in the drunkalogs, not so much in the active addiction piece. Like yes, that has like we can like that for a little bit needs to be mentioned I think to frame the story, but I think most of the story becomes about the transformation. It becomes about like what they learned, what, like societal pieces they unlearned, how they're helping each other. I think the most important thing is now how they're supporting other people in the situations that they once were themselves, which is such an important piece of like recovery. We don't, by helping others, we keep our own recovery. And so I think the story ends up becoming very much framed in the like transformation and the like, what is my vision for the future? Like, what is it that my recovery allows me to do? Help other people and be of service, So I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, I love that so much. I mean, I think about it in terms of challenge, choice, outcome. And
Mm,
Erica Carley, who I think you know, talked about how to use story as a gift back to people. So I think that's
mm.
so powerful. And it's interesting you say, because I think so much of our own success is about the story that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of in the world. So I love that, rewriting the narrative. Okay, we're going to jump into the nitty-gritty details. Let's talk about LinkedIn as a platform versus the other ones. Because as an ED, I'm sure you were there too. You're like, I'm super overwhelmed. I could do LinkedIn, I could do Facebook, I could do Instagram, I could do TikTok, I could do Twitter. Like, there are so many possibilities. For a minute, there was Clubhouse. I don't know what happened to Clubhouse. So of all of the different platforms that we could do, why did you choose LinkedIn?
I love that question. It's like Ariel says, right? Like, I want to be where the people are, right? I want to be where like the movers and the shakers and the, corporate sponsors and the program officers and the Congress people and the referral sources like are and use. And I would never, reach out to a congressman on Instagram. Like, first of all, I know that it's going to be a team member of theirs if they do reach out at all. And it's just not like that's not what Instagram, in my opinion, is for. Whereas LinkedIn was actually designed and built, and the algorithm was like created for building deep business relationships. I also loved LinkedIn because, it's still now today, it's still pretty unsaturated. There's this stat that, 3% of people of active users post their own content. And so that means that there's a lot of people on LinkedIn who are lurking, who are watching, who are like building trust in your solutions and not necessarily ever saying anything about it. And so I think oftentimes people can get dissuaded from using LinkedIn because it feels like nothing is happening. But the reality is, the people that you most want to be in front of, like these people who can be so influential to your nonprofit as a donor, as a community builder, as a potential board member, like there's so many different categories that our LinkedIn people could become in our world, like they are there watching. Another piece is that LinkedIn is actually a trusted site in and of itself. Like I knew as a young woman ED, like I wasn't going to have to like sort through weird, funky like invitations to go on dates. Like it was just a professional, safe, civilized platform. And also I wasn't going to need to like show up and like make dance videos. Like I don't know about you, like that's just on me. That's just not me. Some other people are great at those kinds of social media pieces, and that's not me, like in any capacity, especially at work. And the last thing I'll say, I mean, there's so much that I could say, like I just keep going forever. Like we talk about this for the whole rest of the thing, but it's sustainable. Like you said, like what happened to Clubhouse, right? Versus LinkedIn is actually older than MySpace. It is old.
For the babies out there who have no idea what MySpace is, it was like the predecessor of Facebook.
Yes, it's old. Like us elder millennials and up will remember it fondly, but it just shows us like LinkedIn is reliable. It's steady Eddie. It's like it's gonna be there. And the other part of that credibility too is I know if I make a connection with someone, like let's say I really vibe and connect with an ED of a similar organization and we start to brainstorm ways to partner. If they end up leaving, that business card that I got from her, like I might as well just rip it up. Like those numbers, those emails don't work anymore. But on LinkedIn, we're creating this flexible Rolodex so that even as people move and shift jobs, sometimes even shift what do you call it? Like shift sectors,
Companies,
right? Companies, sectors,
right.
as they make total career shifts, as they become entrepreneurs, we can still have a direct line of contact to them just through a DM. So that's a few of the reasons that I really love and picked LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, samesies, because the other piece that I really liked about LinkedIn is if you look at the demographics of who uses LinkedIn versus the other platforms, it tends to be older and wealthier. So
Yeah,
again, you got to go fish in the ponds that you want to be in. So
that's
the
it.
other thing that you said that I just think is so important that cannot be overstated enough is consistency. So I noticed that
Mm.
you said you posted every week, even when you weren't getting traction, even when you thought people weren't looking. And I think the mistake that a lot of folks make, both entrepreneurs and nonprofit marketing folks, is that they quit too early, or they're not
Yeah.
consistent, or they like post when they get inspired. Right? So, talk to me about the importance of consistency on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you're like speaking my language. Like I wish that we could just talk for days about this stuff. It's my favorite thing. So people worry sometimes that consistency will come at the expense of creativity. And I don't think that's the case. In fact, I think that there's a really beautiful dance between them. Because having a publishing cadence, let's say it's once per week, which is what I teach. I teach this thing called being lazy on LinkedIn, which is like you, especially for nonprofit EDs who are busy and fundraisers who are busy, you don't really need to post more than once per week. Like you're not trying to create a media company. You're not trying to go viral and become LinkedIn famous. Like you're just trying to stay top of mind and be consistent. And, I always think of this thing that many of us have heard about, which is like this marketing rule of seven, which is you need to be, your message needs to land 7 times to be like really heard by your audience. Well, that came out in the 1930s. Like that was a group of movie executives who were trying to figure out how to get people in to see their movies, and they realized they needed to show up 7 times in people's lives. Well, in 2023, that number is going to be a lot higher. And so consistency is the way that we do that. And you're right, it's not going to look like a lot in the beginning, but all of these efforts build on top of each other. And I'm a big James Clear fan, and he says this quote like, no energy is ever wasted, it's only stored. And that is what your content is going to do in those weeks where it feels like nothing is happening. That energy becomes stored in people's minds and hearts and souls. And once that tipping point occurs, and you don't know when that post is going to be, and maybe it's not going to be a LinkedIn thing, maybe they get your appeal letter and they have been seeing your LinkedIn content week after week after week. And they're like, oh, I know this organization. I know this ED. I remember the story they shared about XYZ and it was so incredible. Like it makes you stand out in the noise, being consistent, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention it because so often, like I post regularly on LinkedIn, and I have no idea really who's seeing. Like you can see analytics, but like you don't really know who they are. And I actually got a pretty impressive keynote speaking engagement based on LinkedIn. They're like, "Yeah, we found you on LinkedIn. We read your stuff, and then we followed your podcast, and like we knew that we wanted to invite you." And I was like, "Wow, okay." So here's the power of LinkedIn. So even if you don't know if people are looking, they're looking.
Yes, they are looking. And if you decide to go for a paid profile, which you absolutely don't have to do, but you can actually see who is looking when you have that paid profile. And I think that can be really helpful because people are shy. I mean, think about your own behavior. Like if you're checking out this nonprofit you really dig and you really like, and maybe you want to join one of their committees or get involved somehow, like Well, you are a nonprofit change maker, kick-ass person. So maybe you're just going to reach out and be like, yeah, like I want to get involved. But most people are going to be like a little coy and a little shy. But if they're checking out your profile, that's a signal. It's a signal of resonance. And so, yeah, like you can really see like who's scoping you out and start to build a relationship that way too.
Awesome. And actually, let's put a pin in this because I want to talk about automations. So I think that's really important. But let's talk about brand building on LinkedIn, right? So oftentimes, I'll just speak for myself, at N of one, I never really fully absorbed the ways in which I was the face of my brand. And
Mm.
so, what are some of the tips that you have for building your brand on LinkedIn? Things that we should be aware of, things that we should look out for?
Yes, 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 yes. I mean, this is such a big question that I love. I'm just going to say like the first couple things that come to mind. I would say, the practice of honing your perspective and your voice is so key in not just building your personal brand, but being a leader. Like, I think that the things that help us build a personal brand also create embodied leadership at our nonprofits, as we lead, in the world, as we make movements happen. I think one of the things that you can really do to build your personal brand right away is like really think about what is your unique perspective on some of the topics that come up in your field all the time, right? So like in my field in the mental health sector, stigma was a huge kind of topic. Insurance reimbursement and like fighting for fair insurance reimbursement was a huge topic. Workforce development and making sure that we had a pipeline of young women, diverse leaders coming up in the field, because when we'd go to these conferences, like it was just a seat. It was, we were not really showing up there. And so those are three big things that I knew that I was opinionated about. And so I could sort of create key brand messages around that. And over time, as I kept talking about that and talking about that, and here's the thing, you're going to end up talking about these things and sharing your key brand messages so many times, you're going to be like, people are going to be so tired of me saying this. And when you think that, people are finally just starting to hear you, I think. And so that is like one of the big things I would do. Like, think about what your perspectives are. And ideally, if you have a little like a ahead of your time perspective, or a perspective that kind of gets at the status quo, or a perspective that not everybody is going to just like be like, I agree with that. That is a sign and a signal that you've got something, like you've got a soapbox issue, and it's time to build your personal brand around that, become known for that.
I love that. Let's talk about your audience because I think sometimes what I see with well, in general, but let's say nonprofits, is that they're putting out a message, whether it's LinkedIn or some other social media site or even their newsletter, but it's not targeted to an audience.
Mm.
So, talk to us about how we can hone in on who we're actually talking to. Because again, I like to say if we're talking to everybody, we're talking to nobody.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great quote. And I think as nonprofits, as like the larger nonprofit entity, we are talking to a lot of different audiences, right? Like we have donors, we have referral sources, we have like government folks, we have all these different types of people. And what's kind of beautiful about building a personal brand as a nonprofit leader is you get to pick the audience that you kind of really want to talk to and that lights you up and that you were kind of put on this planet to like make a difference for. And so often it is the person that you once were or still are. It's the person that you can become a guide for because you have trudged through that journey yourself. And now you have some nuggets of expertise and advice and wisdom to pass on. Um, I always think about the example of like, remember when we went to college to check out what college we wanted to go to, or we went to some camp or some place and we were like, let me check out this place and see if it's right for me. It's usually not the dean of that college that's giving us the tour. It's not the like head of the camp that's giving us the tour. It's the freshman or the kid who's 1 year older than us who's giving us a tour and like enrolling us into that experience. And that is the exact right person because they're relatable. They are resonant. Like they know what we're going through right now. And so similarly, as a nonprofit leader building your personal brand, it's like, think about that person who was you 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and start putting out the content that you wish you had. And that is your mission as you build your brand. Like that is who you're speaking to. You're speaking in a lot of ways to yourself.
Interesting. So should we not be using LinkedIn to speak to potential donors? Because the other thing I'm considering is, as I think about fundraising, it's inviting people into a story. And the reason why
Yeah,
donors might be interested is like they might learn something or they might feel something. So those aren't particularly people who are, me 3 years ago. How do we square that?
totally. Yeah, that's a great question and clarification. So they may not be me 3 years ago, but in a lot of ways, what they're striving for, what they're working towards is so like for let me share an example. When I would fundraise, I would often tell the story of when I first stepped onto the campus of my organization. And I had a very specific idea of what it was going to be like. It was an addiction treatment program. It was an addiction treatment program for pregnant women. And I'm like, a little embarrassed to say, I had a lot of stigma in my mind around what that might look like and what I might find when I got there. But when I stepped onto the campus, I saw a beautiful facility. I literally saw butterflies flying around. And I sat in one of the rocking chairs as I waited to go back for my interview. And there was a woman there who I knew from college. She was my classmate. Like we had psychology and women's studies classes together. And I was like, hey, but I called her by her first name. I was like, are you here for the interview? Like, are you interviewing for this position? And she's like, no, I live here. Like I'm going through this program. And she totally opened up to me and shared her story. And in that moment, it was like going up against a brick wall and realizing how much stigma that I had even had. Like I thought I was a relatively enlightened individual. And I just had a certain framing in my mind of what somebody who struggled with substance use disorder looked like, talked like, felt like, what a place like that would be like. And as I shared that story, of what I had thought in my previous journey, I saw donors start to like shift. Like I saw their shoulders start to like change. I saw their bodies start to change as they too realized the stigma that they maybe have carried. And they realized that that wasn't a story that necessarily was true. And so that's one example where I could use my own story and my own sort of like brand in a way, like my own brand story. That's really what that is, to relate to people who are having their own experience of the organization. So how does that land with you?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's helpful to, when I think about story frameworks, the story of self, us, and now, right? Like I can
Yeah.
connect with people with my own experience connected to how that might relate to us as a collective. And then what does that mean now? I want to switch
Yes.
to tax a little bit. I want to talk about thought leadership because I know you're
Yeah.
an expert in thought leadership, particularly for women, which I so love. Um, so many questions here, but I think the first is when I see people who are reluctant to call themselves a thought leader, a lot of it has to do with fear, right? And the fear
Yeah.
of being seen and the fear of offending or the fear of saying something that people will disagree with. So, talk to me a little bit about what are the first steps that we have to get through in order to establish ourselves as thought leaders?
Yeah, I that's so good. And I think the first step before we even get into like strategy is looking internally at, a lot of people call them self-limiting beliefs. I like to call them systematically limited beliefs because they're not ours innately, like imposter thoughts, perfectionism, people pleasing, urgency, like all of these things that we face as we work towards becoming go-to voices and practice guides in our field, like are very real responses to living in systems that are trash in a lot of ways, that are meant to be harmful, to folks that don't belong to like these dominant, categories. And so I think the very first thing we need to do is like start to really sit with that, sometimes people call it an inner critic. And I like to call it an inner chaperone because that part of ourselves has been created to protect us, to be a protective response, right? And I have a lot of love and gratitude for that part of myself. And I think that we can work together on the same team to do this scary thing of being a thought leader. And it's not our fault that it is scary, and it's very real that there is fear involved. And I also hold the fact that if we are called to create change and affect change at this in this issue that we are so passionate about, I think it is a responsibility that we have to get 1% more uncomfortable and stretch ourselves 1% more with every single action. And before long, like you will be amazed. Like if I could look back at my like, gosh, I want to say like 2013 self, and show her what I was today, like I wouldn't even believe it. Like I would not believe it. And what's so cool about that is I know that if my 20, what year are we even in? Like my 2030 self was to look back at me now, now I wouldn't even believe what is to come in the future. But all of those changes come with just like that 1% stretch,
I
before we even
love
get into
that.
strategy. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought you would like that. I
I
thought you
do
would think.
like that because actually that 1% degree means the difference between flying to New York and flying to Boston, right? So you said 1 degree, say you're in LA, like it makes a big difference and it compounds over time. So I love that. You just said 1% better.
Oh,
Okay.
so that's a piece from Atomic Habits, as I know you know, and I read that on a plane. I was reading that on a plane, and I was like, "Oh God, I hope this pilot has this stuff put together." Because yeah, these 1% shifts create huge shift over time, and we are playing a long game, right? We're all about cathedral thinking as nonprofit leaders. Like we are sometimes trying to build cathedrals that we'll never sit in ourselves, and so we have time. We have
Yeah.
time to, yeah,
Well, and I love that too, because I think the impulse is to look at people on social media and you get this idea of like, oh, this happened for them overnight, right? But
right,
you didn't see all of the years of them, consistently coming to the platform, doing their posts, yada, yada, yada. All you see is the outcome that you think is overnight success. And I think that happens with fundraising. I think it happens with life. Like we're always comparing our
right.
insides to people's outsides, right?
That's so spot on. That's so spot on. And that compare and despair like concept is a quick pathway to just like quitting, right? And so like we're only sort of competing against ourselves. It's like I don't know if you ever played Super Mario Mario Kart,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you
yeah.
would like, yeah, then you have like the ghost level where you're competing against yourself. That's how I try to think of this work.
That's so funny. I played Mario Kart with my nephew this weekend, and he's 7, and I was like, I haven't played this in 20 years. And I was playing. He's like, oh, you're remembering. I was like, thank you, Lucas.
You remember. I love it.
Thank you, Lucas. Okay. So, I want to talk about sort of tactically speaking. I know every platform has its own kind of style to it. What would
Yeah.
you characterize as the LinkedIn style? And then I have some follow-up questions about what we do about it. But like when we think about posting, what are we looking to do here?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I've never been asked that in those words, but I love the question. So the LinkedIn style, I mean, the LinkedIn style is professional, but it's about community building. So I would say posts that do really well, or content that does really well, or just ways of showing up that kind of do really well, is showing up with stories of partnership. And again, it's because the algorithm is really designed to connect and build business relationships. And so as nonprofit leaders, we are so in community with each other, right? We're on boards, we're on committees, we go to networking gatherings, we work together collaboratively. And so I remember like back in the day when I was still in the trenches of nonprofit leadership, this is a little embarrassing because it's a little superficial, but I'm just going to say it. I don't care. I feel safe with you. So I, uh, I use this app called Rent the Runway. And before the pandemic, at least I'd use it all the time because I'd be out, like many change makers who are listening to this, I'd be out at gatherings and luncheons and fundraising breakfasts here in Orange County, California. I was just like out doing the do. And, there'd be photographers and stuff. And it's embarrassing because it's a little superficial, but I don't care. Um, these dresses would make me feel really confident and I would want to get sort of a picture of them. Because I'm like, well, I rented this. Let me get a picture. And once I had the picture, I was like, okay, well, let me just memorialize this. This was like back in the beginning when I was just figuring out how to create a personal brand. So I'd get this picture and I'd post it on LinkedIn with a little caption of what was going on, like who was in the picture, what we were working on. Like, are we raising money for Planned Parenthood? Are we here at a committee trying to create this very specific action? What are we doing? I talk about what was going on, how people could get involved. I tag people specifically for the expertise they brought to the table. And after a few months, I realized that people would come up to me at these gatherings and be like, wow, you're doing so much, you're so involved. And it was funny because I was not more involved than anybody else there. We were all involved, we were all doing a lot. And sometimes, like you shared earlier, like they would invite me as a result of one of these posts to speak on a panel or invite me into one of these opportunities because they would see me out and about in community, in partnership, like having built connective tissue with these others, movers and shakers in the nonprofit space. And, I think so if I were to say what is the style of LinkedIn, I think it's about sharing stories of community, right? I think it's not about doing the things that we do behind the scenes and behind the curtain. It's like get loud about what the work that you do is, because nobody's going to speak up for your work. You have to speak up for your work. And when you speak up for each other's work and really come at it from this collective perspective, you all grow as a result because of the way LinkedIn algorithm is. So like if you and I are in a mastermind, if we're working on something beautiful together and I post a picture about it and I tag you, the people that are in your network who aren't in my network are going to see it and they're going to be like, who's this Tania person? I think this is pretty interesting. And maybe they're going to follow me. They're going to connect with me. And this works so beautifully for nonprofits because let's say you're doing something with your board members, you tag them, all their business colleagues are going to start seeing your mission and your work start to show up in their feed. And over time, they're going to start to see your organization as an organization they should get to know. So yeah, how does
Yeah.
that land?
Yeah, that's awesome because I actually think the other mistake that I see is that people do the post, but they don't tag others and they don't
Mm,
use the hashtags, right? Because the nature of it is social. Like you want more
yes.
eyeballs on the thing. So you should tag people so that it gets into their feed. So, Tanya, let me ask a really tactical question. Let's say I'm out here, I'm putting out the content, people are liking it, maybe they're resharing it. What do I do then? Like, how do I get them to be in my community? Because it's all well and good. And I think you see this a lot in like Facebook or Instagram, like people
Yeah.
like, but how does it translate to actual either donations or volunteers or board members?
Yeah. So I'd say two things, like two big chunks. The first thing is to really kind of optimize your LinkedIn profile so that when somebody sees your content out in the wild, like they're not necessarily friends with you yet, but they see it out in the wild, they go to your profile to get to know more about you because they're interested. It's really important to have kind of an optimized LinkedIn profile that tells them exactly what it is that you do, how it's unique, and how they can get involved. That might be a link to your, monthly giving page at the very top of your profile. That might be links in your featured section that have like I don't know, like whatever it is that you would want somebody to see at that next level of their journey, whether it's an annual report or it's like a video that really tells the stories of what you all do, whatever that is. And also I would say the last thing in terms of your LinkedIn profile is really look at your about section. Your about section is oftentimes where resumes go to die. Like it just looks like a resume that nobody wants to read, but you want to be a resource in your about section and you have a lot of characters to play with here. So this is where you can tell your story. This is where you can tell the story of, what brought you there? Why do you stay? How can somebody get involved? You can include some social proof there if you want to, and just a call to action of what that person needs to do next if they want to get more involved with your organization. So that's kind of the first big chunk of what I would do. The second big chunk is really to, we talked about content, and the next kind of big C is community. Like if people say content is king or whatever, but I really think community building is maybe even more important than content, right? Usually this is the missing piece. When people feel like they're doing all the right things on LinkedIn, but they're not getting traction, they're usually not taking the action of building the community. And so what that might look like is if you see someone viewing your profile, if you see somebody liking your content over and over, if you see somebody commenting on your profile, and again, like it's hard because a lot of these things are invisible. Like the people who end up becoming, donors to your organization or getting involved aren't always going to be the ones who are like loudly liking your stuff. And so, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. But at the same time, like these people who are showing up, you want to reach out to them and build a relationship. You want to reach out to them and look at their profile and say, "Oh, like I see you're involved in an animal welfare organization. Like that's so interesting. Like what is that like?" Just asking them questions about their work. How did they get there? What are they excited about? And as you build relationships in the DMs, um, you know, relationships begin to form. And something that people don't always know or use is you can send audio messages in the DMs. You can send video messages natively in the DMs. And nobody does this. And so this is something that will help you stand out and really begin to become known with your people.
I love that so much. And I think the thing that I just really want to tag here, underline, highlight, whatever, is the mistake I see a lot of people making on LinkedIn is that they connect and then they jump right to a solicitation, right? That's the same as like
Yes.
asking me to marry you on a first date. And so what I've seen people do is, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I get a lot of random messages, people being like, "Hi, I work for so and so organization. Would you consider a donation?" I'm like, "I don't know you. Like, and you don't
Right.
know me. And like, you don't even know if I care about this particular cause." Right. So I think using it as a way to start a conversation and start a relationship is key, not jumping straight to a solicitation.
100%. That is so important. And it's just like real life, right? It's just like real life. Yeah.
So many things. So, should we be thinking about LinkedIn as a way to encourage people to take an off-platform action? So, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is because I recently got my ad account restricted on Facebook, which is a whole other thing. But when we are doing LinkedIn or whatever social media, we're building on borrowed land. So, how should we think about the relationship between LinkedIn and our email address, or email
Oh,
lists, rather?
so good. You are so, so good. This is super important. And I should have probably said this earlier when I was talking about community building, because yes, you are nurturing people in on LinkedIn in the DMs, but then you do want to take them offline. You do want to take them off of LinkedIn eventually. And I think your email list is a great place to bring people because you do essentially own that list. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, from literally inviting somebody into like a valuable resource that they would want to know more about, that then gets them on their list. Or maybe maybe once a month or once a quarter, you host some kind of like really valuable event where your ED gives a, state of the union on the issue that, people are interested in, that is behind your mission. And you invite people manually that you have been meeting on LinkedIn into this event, right? Into the Zoom, so you get their email list. Um, yeah, I think email list is a great one. And don't forget too, like, if you're local, it's great to meet up with people that you've met on LinkedIn in real life, in person. And you can do that. You can find who's local by kind of filtering down your list. So let's say you search for a certain kind of person. Let's say you have a campaign coming up and you know that you need to work with a bunch of attorneys because you're working on an advocacy campaign for your nonprofit, or you need a bunch of, a certain kind of person. You can search for that on LinkedIn and then filter it by geography. You can filter it by where they went to school. You can filter it by so many different kinds of things. And what's so great for nonprofit folks is there's a checkbox that you can do to check if and filter it by people who have actively said, "Hey, I want to be on a board. Hey, I see you nodding. Like, I know, yeah, I want to be on a board. I want to provide pro bono support." Like, you can literally use LinkedIn to find those people. And that becomes your list of people that you like go have coffee chats with.
I know. It's like the hidden filter that I tell everyone about. I'm like, these are people who are literally have already raised their hand. So it's not like
Yeah.
it's not a random request. Okay, we could talk about this forever, but last question from me. I'm sitting here, I'm like, Tanya, this sounds great. Yes, all the things. I am one person. I do not have time to be all up on LinkedIn all of the time. What are some of or I mean, do you recommend automation? And if so, what are some of the tools that you use?
Yeah, LinkedIn and automation have a prickly relationship. There's a lot of amazing tools for Instagram, like ManyChat and like different things like that. LinkedIn has been very wary of allowing third-party platforms to come in and partner with them. And I've seen people get kicked off the platform for using certain bots and things that like send automatic messages that like automatically connect with certain people. So I'd be very wary about that. You don't want your LinkedIn to get shut off. That being said, I think pre-scheduling posts is a great thing. Like, I think you can definitely do that. You can use an external platform like Hootsuite, like LinkedIn is fine with that. But LinkedIn actually has their own tool to natively schedule your posts. And I have noticed a little bit of a higher, like, people engage higher. I think the algorithm favors it when you natively schedule posts on LinkedIn. So yes, you're one person. A lot of nonprofit leaders are small shops or are a team of one within their like marketing team, within their development team. And so you can only do what you can do. And I think some ways you can organize your time are, I'm a big fan of batching posts. And because I really am a big fan of being, quote unquote, lazy on LinkedIn and just posting once a week, if you can schedule a little creative time, a little artist date with yourself once a month, maybe at the top of the month, and go to a coffee shop, go to the beach, go to a gorge, go do something beautiful and you know, um, just like wonderfully for yourself. And think about what you are most passionate about. Think about the things that your donors are telling you. Think about the things that if you had a magic wand, you would change in your field, right? And just start writing. Like at first, if you're new to this, you can just treat it as a journal entry. Like you don't have to post everything you write right away. Like just give yourself the freedom and the grace to let what needs to come out come out. And over time, like, yes, this is about building your brand and growing your nonprofit's impact, but it's also, and I can't stress this enough, this is also about self-actualization. And this is about becoming a leader in your own right. And so just, put pen to paper and like share what you care about. And some of those things will end up becoming posts that you can then pre-schedule on LinkedIn a month at a time.
I love that. Okay, another tactical question. We can go on forever. Two more
Yeah.
questions. Tactical question though. I've been noticing on LinkedIn, you can have the posts, which are just like actual text. You can have posts with pictures. You can have
Yeah.
carousels, which I've noticed people have started to do, which are like those 10-page click-through things.
Yeah.
Which I know you're a big fan of some of your stuff. You can
Yep.
have videos. You can have audio. So what's performing well? Like, what should we be
Yeah.
thinking about as far as content creation?
Great question. On just like a sustainability and consistency basis, I think a picture and some text does the best and it's the easiest to do. And I have found, and we all know this as, comms people and marketing people, pictures of you will do best. Pictures of your face, pictures of you, doing things with other people. That will always kind of get people's attention because as humans, like we're programmed to kind of build trust in people's faces. Like that's just how we are. So I would say if you're just starting, focus on a post that's text with a picture of you or that has something to do with what you're talking about. What does really well from an algorithm perspective are those carousels that you mentioned. Like LinkedIn just loves them for whatever reason. You can create them by going to Canva and essentially like, and you've probably seen them. Like it's when people take a post almost and separate it out into little chunks. It almost looks like a Twitter feed, but it's a carousel. And you can create this in Canva. What you want to do is download it as a PDF and then upload it as a document. And so that's kind of how that carousel gets created. Videos, for whatever reason on LinkedIn, like I know videos are hot, they're important. For whatever reason on LinkedIn, they don't get a ton of engagement, but I have found that the people who do watch it tend to take an action. So they're not great for just like engage, like tons of engagement and like vanity metrics, but the people who watch it do get enrolled into your experience in a really beautiful way. So don't be afraid of videos, but definitely post them natively in the platform. Don't post like a link to YouTube because the algorithm doesn't like that. It wants you to stay on the platform. And the last thing, I don't know if you mentioned polls, but polls are actually like one of my favorite things to do. You can do a poll and see how people vote. Other people can't see, so it's like still kind of anonymous, but you can see how people vote and then send them a message directly from that kind of place and follow up with them based on how they have voted in that poll. So it's a really, really great way to just kind of like do market research, ask kind of a sensitive question and get real-time responses. And on my podcast, The Campfire Circle, I have a whole episode on exactly like how to do a poll to really maximize a poll.
I love that. I hadn't even considered that. I did a poll just for fun. And it was about which of the Roy children would be the worst
Oh,
donor.
I
And
love that.
for some reason, like it blew up, right? But I was like, that was just a fun thing that I thought of after watching Succession.
Oh my
So
God.
definitely it's inspiring me to do more polls.
Kendall would be the worst.
The
The,
worst,
the
right? I know.
worst. The
I
worst.
totally agree. Kendall's the worst.
But I love Jerry. Jerry would be the best. Jerry would be the
Yeah, but she's
best
not a
donor.
Roy kid. Like it's
True.
though I think okay, well we can get
I
into
guess
this.
Siobhan. I guess Siobhan. We can
So
get into that offline.
yeah,
Yeah.
Shiv might be interesting. Anyway, okay, last question. Something I've been really thinking about recently is with all of the noise, all of the whatever, it's so hard, I think, to capture people's attention. And so, what are your thoughts about the becoming micro famous as opposed to
Yeah.
macro famous, right? Because like we're not Bill Gates, we're not going to have a bajillion followers. We're not even Tania Bhattacharyya. Like I don't know how many people you have, right? But I really think that I think about Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans. Like really, when you
Mhm.
think about it, most nonprofits don't need to be the Bill Gates. They don't need that sort of magnitude of celebrity, I guess you want to say.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can have a smaller group that's very passionate about what you do. So, what are your thoughts about micro famous?
I love this so much. I think that this is the goal for nonprofit. Like if like imagine going viral and being Bill Gates famous, like what would we even do with that? Like how would we even harness that? It would be overwhelming and especially for our nervous systems, I think. Because we're talking about personal brands, we would be overwhelmed at that level of attention, I think. I love this piece about being micro famous. And I'd like to think about this as resonance. Like we're trying to achieve resonance versus reach. Resonance is this actually, it's a physics term, and it's a physics term where like the vibration of an object causes other objects around it to vibrate at a higher frequency. And essentially, that's what we're trying to do. Like, we're not trying to boil the entire ocean. Like, we're just trying to, connect with the people just like right around us. Um, yeah, and so I think a great metric to track around residents, yeah, like if we can stop tracking vanity metrics and start tracking, okay, how many conversations am I having? How many people am I moving from LinkedIn into a more fulsome relationship offline, into maybe a monthly donor relationship, into a coffee chat relationship. How many people are resharing my stuff? I think that's a really great thing to look at, because when people reshare your stuff, when your donors, when your board members, when your fans are resharing your stuff, that means they're resonating with it and they want other people to see it too. And that's a little clue or a signal that the people who keep resharing your stuff and maybe haven't ever reached out to you, maybe reach out to them. So yeah, and what's going to happen over time as you become micro famous, is you're going to go to these gatherings and go to these events in real life, these conferences, and people are going to come up to you. This happened to one of my clients who's a nonprofit ED. They're going to come up to you and say, I really love what you've been sharing on LinkedIn. Like, and they'll have a conversation with you about it. And maybe they never reached out on the platform, but they are listening, they're resonating, and they're telling their friends about it. I think that's the most important thing about these relationships that we have as micro influencers, is they are doing all these invisible things that we can't see that create such a ripple effect. They're telling their friends, they're telling their spouses, they are, sharing it in ways that you can't see. And yeah, it's creating so much influence and change making capacity. And that's the part of the magic of this work that we're never going to know the full extent of, but we kind of have to trust the process in a lot of ways because
Yeah,
it's working.
I love that. Okay, wait. This is really the last question, but because we can go on for hours. But
Okay.
one thing that you said was, how are we creating value to get people off of the platform? But I think there's also something there about how are we creating value-driven content? And so, what do you
Mm,
mean by that? Because I think so often in nonprofits, I think people talk a lot about themselves, right? Like we're doing this work and it's doing X, Y, Z. But how do we think about creating content that is valuable to our audience?
yeah, that's so good. It's not always about providing all the info. Like sometimes I think people think it's about providing all the information and the data and the statistics and like the reporting. That might be valuable to you internally, but it can sometimes look and feel like jargon to some of your audiences, right? And so I think when we talk about value, I think we also have to talk about the other V word, which is vision. Like I think value and vision are directly intertwined. So I think to show up with a lot of value, I think we have got to think about what is the vision, the common aligned vision that we have with our audience. What is the beautiful, just, inclusive, like changed world that they want to live in? And how do we share stories from that perspective? Like, how do we share a story that, shows us living in that? Okay, so I'll share. I think I always have to share it with examples, right? So I knew that when I was at my organization, the people who supported our mission were also very passionate about breaking down the stigma of addiction, because either they or someone in their life probably struggled with addiction themselves. And so I would share stories of, going to a screening of Anonymous People, which is like a movie that, breaks down the stigma of addiction. It's kind of old now, and so I'd share a picture of us going to the screening. I'd share quotes of what we got out of it. I'd share all about that. And it was valuable because it presented a different way of thinking. It presented a perspective that changed people's hearts and minds. It showed what could be. And because of that value, it prompts people into action. Like it makes them want to roll up their sleeves and help you in the ways that they can create that vision for the future. I know that that's a little bit like I know that sounds a little airy fairy and not as concrete, but vision and value can be very concrete when we're working within it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. I think as you're thinking about content, you have to think about what do people want, right? So in your case, that would be they want to be inspired. Some cases they
Yes.
might want to be educated, right? If they want to know more about the topic. In some cases they want to be amused. So I think about that,
Mhm.
Roy Kidd poll. That wasn't anything other than just like be amusing. So I think you really have to think about how do you capture the attention in this very busy sphere? Because like we've all got like 8 seconds of attention span. We need it to really grab us, or we're just moving on. So
Yeah.
um again, putting yourself in the shoes of your donor or your audience, like what would be interesting or of value to them. Tania, this has been so illuminating. Where can folks work with you? What do you got going on? If people want more Tania Bhattacharya in their lives.
If you want more Tania Bhattacharya in your lives, definitely come hang out with me on LinkedIn. Like that is my playground. That is my spot. Come find me, connect with me. Like let's be friends. I also have a podcast called The Campfire Circle, which is all about breaking down the boardroom table as the ultimate space of leadership and replacing it with a campfire circle because that's where we share our
I
stories.
love that.
Yep. And I'd say those are the two big ways.
Awesome. Tania, this has been so fun. Let's do it again because there's so much more we can talk
Yes.
about.
100%. Let's do it in like live in person soon.
That would be so fun. I mean, the fact that I was in
Yes.
California, we didn't hang out. It's so silly.
I know, so silly. Well, I got to come to New York and hang out with you and eat some good food.
Yeah, come on. Mikasa Sukasa. All right, Tanya, thank you so much. It's been so fun. Everyone, I will put Tanya's info in the show notes. Connect with her. She is a LinkedIn genius.